Welcome back to Green is Good, and we're so excited to have live from Brooklyn on with us today, Joshua Katcher. Joshua is a unique and visionary entrepreneur who has two amazing websites and is making change in so many ways. Welcome to Green is Good, Joshua Katcher.
Thank you, John. I'm very excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, we are so happy to have you on today. You're doing so many unique things, and I want to sort of, and you know, I got to just tell my audience right now, you've had more wonderful things said about you than almost all of my guests put together over the last 4 years. I mean, wow. and I'm just going to give a couple of examples because we want to get to the meat and potatoes of everything we're doing here. But Oprah.com, they call you vegan superstar Joshua Katcher. Veg News Magazine, ethical style icon. Now, I'm a vegan, Joshua. I'm a full-on vegan, and so is my family. So to have a vegan superstar on Green is Good, this is an exciting day for me. This is good stuff.
Well, I'm glad, and vegan superstar. I think within the context of the mainstream, some people might be saying, "Huh, what's that?" But it's a nice compliment.
It's a great compliment, and you have. And I just want to lead off with your two great websites, and I'm on one of them right now. I've been on both of them many times, and I want our listeners to go out there and check them out and use your great websites. One is called thediscerningbrute.com, thediscerningbrute.com, and the other one is GentleMan.com. Let's get into this now a little bit, Joshua. Talk about your journey. Before we even get into any Q&A, talk about how you got here. You're a young guy. How do you get to have two very successful ventures going on, covering all sorts of fashion and food at the same time? Talk a little bit about how you got here.
Sure. Well, I went to college for environmental studies and video art, and for many years I was working in the television industry as an editor and a producer. I worked at MTV. I worked in a lot of reality television shows that probably a lot of your listeners have seen. I don't know if I'm allowed to mention which ones, but then I always really cared about animals and the environment, and I was in a lot of activism during college, and I was trying to figure out how can I combine what I really care about with what I'm good at. And I tried for a long time to make it work in the television world, to create a show about these ideas, and that just didn't seem to be working out. It conflicted with a lot of what advertisers were willing to advertise their products during. So I decided to get into fashion because fashion is such a powerful form of visual communication, and it's so relevant. We all participate in the fashion system, whether or not we think we do. We all buy clothes, and it's a global, huge, impactful industry, and it affects millions of people all over the world, and it affects ecosystems and animals, and it is a true global industry. And if we identify so powerfully with how we present ourselves and how we dress, I think that can really be a place of leverage where change can be made. So I wanted to start talking about fashion from that perspective and present it as something that's not just frivolous, that it's actually very powerful. So that's why I started The Discerning Brute, and it became sort of an alternative to GQ or to Details or to Esquire, where it's geared towards guys. Because we're often told that, caring about stuff is something that women do. It's feminine. But I think that men can feel very, empowered when we take action and we care about things, and we can become a defender, a protector. And there's nothing masculine about not caring about stuff.
That's so interesting. No, and I'm on your site now, the Discerning Brute. And again, for our listeners out there, the discerningbrute.com. It is so well done, and there's so much great information here. So explain then, what do you mean by the terms, as I've just read it on your websites and in the literature about you, what do you mean by ethical fashion?
Ethical fashion means that the way things are made are done in an ethical way. If you take any garment, let's take a suit jacket, for example.
Yeah.
We want to know, what is it made out of? Who made it? Where was it made? Was it made under fair labor conditions? Was it made in a sweatshop? Is it made with materials that were milled in a closed-loop factory with recycled or organic fibers, or is it toxic materials, that are spilling out into some small community, in a developing country that we don't have to look at? And who was affected? Who are the people that are working on it? And were there animals put into the equation? Are we raising entire, herds of livestock to create wool? And that has, for example, wool is it's crazy. A lot of people don't think about wool from a critical standpoint. It's New Zealand and Australia's, one of their top environmental problems is sheep, because there's so many greenhouse gas emissions, erosion, water consumption, resource consumption. So these are all things that play into the idea of ethical fashion. The production model, the traditional production model, is a linear model, and we know that that's a problem because it doesn't answer the question of where did it come from and where is it going after it's gone. Right. We have to close that loop and make it a closed loop system.
So then let's jump ahead then. So I'm a vegan, you're a vegan. What's a vegan suit, though? I never heard of this.
Well, as I was touching on before, a lot of animal products end up in our clothing, and we don't really think too critically about that. We've been told by advertising and by marketing that leather and wool and fur and silk and all of these things they're luxurious and they're the definition of what quality is. Right. But if we really look critically at what are these fibers and where are they coming from and how they're made, we'll realize it's just a marketing campaign. And the real exciting, innovative future technologies are in synthetics and in organic plant-based materials that we can make so many exciting textiles that people aren't really tapping into that don't have to involve animals. And both from an environmental standpoint and from an ethical standpoint, not using animals really solves so many problems. For example, the leather industry, there was just a huge expose report that was released about the human rights crisis that goes on with leather production in Bangladesh and in India. All of these illegal tanneries that are dumping, millions of gallons of toxic chemicals into their waterways, and children are, in liming baths without protective clothing, making the leather. So, and then on top of that, think about the amount of resources it takes to raise cattle, and then that becomes leather. So if we have products like a microfiber or a future leather that is superior and it performs better and it feels better, why not use that?
Listen, you're talking about something that's so important that unfortunately we have never even covered on this show before. This is just fascinating. Talk a little bit then about, you've already touched on it, but go more into, I want to understand, when you talk about fashion and animals, you bring up the word semiotics. I've never heard of that. Explain how that all plays together and what this really mean and why it's important.
Sure. I mean, semiotics is something that is overlooked frequently in our culture, especially within the business world. Unless you're in advertising or marketing, you're not going to really pay attention to semiotics too much. But semiotics is just, it's about symbology and about what things mean. Aesthetic, what an aesthetic object can mean, and it can define class, and it can define value, and whether something is desirable. And I think that when we look at fashion and fashion semiotics, a lot of things that are subconscious, such as take a fur coat, that has come to define class and class status and wealth and being sexy and being powerful. And we don't really question that. That just becomes natural, that, that's what a fur coat means. It means these things. So that's really what semiotics is about deconstructing that symbology, understanding the
That's so interesting. Yeah. So talk about a little bit ethical fashion. When did you launch The Discerning Brute and The Brave GentleMan?
I started The Discerning Brute in 2008, and then a few years later, Brave GentleMan emerged from The Discerning Brute as a fashion line and an online store, an e-commerce platform. And in doing my research on the discerning brute, I was always looking for things to write about for guys. So I was looking for suits, I'm looking for shoes, I'm looking for, all different things that guys wanted, but there maybe wasn't an ethical version of.
Right.
And over time, I realized that a lot of these things didn't exist, and why wasn't I creating them? So I went into a partnership with Novakas Shoes, which is an existing vegan shoe brand based in New York. They're made in Portugal, and I designed a line of shoes for them. And then that really took off, and people were so excited with. I was just doing classic men's shoes, and now we're going into our third or fourth season with the shoes.
So the future. I'm interrupting, I know, but is ethical fashion that you're going down the route of, are you seeing a lot more interest in it and a lot more adoption of it by the client base that you serve?
Absolutely. There is an increasing awareness of global issues. There is an increasing demand for products that are made ethically. And I think what's happening is, as people are finding out more information and transparency is becoming such a priority in business, people are realizing that, you in a way, you can have your cake and eat it if you have ethical fashion, because if a company has to hide their production process, that should be a red flag. I think that companies should be proud of their production process. It should be a selling point. It should be something that is marketed. And there's a level of enjoyment that you get out of knowing what you're indulging in has been created ethically. I think if you're indulging in something and you don't know how it's made and it has a questionable history, there's always that little, voice in the back of your head that's like, this is probably not the best decision, or I know that this is bad, but I'm doing it anyway. But when you invest in something that's made ethically, that's not there, and you're able to enjoy it even more. And I think people are realizing that, and the rewards of investing in ethically crafted, whether it's a suit or whether it's food, whatever it is.
You're right.
You enjoy it so much more, and I think that really is catching on.
Well, let's talk about that. How has high-tech innovation, organic plant-based materials, and your production model been integrated? Like, what is happening? Has technology now helped you with the production and the velocity in ethical fashion and the sales of both suits and clothing and shoes in this whole new arena?
Absolutely. And the most exciting thing about it is we're taking these heritage, traditional methodologies, a tailor, a small family factory in Italy that I use, and then pairing it with high-tech textile innovation. And when I say high-tech textile innovation, I'm talking, really luxurious fabrics made from recycled soda bottles and water bottles. Yeah. And something like that, where in the past that would be unheard of. The technology didn't exist. And now the technology is just growing exponentially. And we're figuring out ways that we can deal with both our waste in an innovative way and ways that we can create new products in a way that's harmless, in a closed-loop system, or in a way that's really integrated into a local ecosystem so it doesn't affect them negatively. So I'm just so excited with all the innovations that are happening, and the places that it's really taking off are in Europe and in Japan. Some places in China have some really good factories that are producing sustainable textiles, but the amount of textiles that are produced, it's shocking. Again, I think people tend to think clothes are a frivolous thing. And when you look at the numbers of how much is produced, how much is thrown away, it's staggering. It's shocking. It is such an impactful industry.
So so why is the fashion industry so slow to respond? I mean, McDonald's even started, making salads, and other fast food chains and other traditional legacy brands have sort of adopted healthy food and healthy drink to their menus. How come the fashion industry been slow to respond and not producing their own lines of ethical fashion and leaving niches like this for you to totally take and create and scale?
It is a huge problem, and it's a little bit of a mystery because the fashion industry really, presents itself as this very progressive industry. And we have these changing seasons where, there's a spring season and then a fall season and then a spring season. And there's this idea of momentum, of moving forward, working towards something. But it really isn't. It's almost change for the sake of change. It's just all about transience. And there is no defined goal. There's no telos. There's no final purpose of fashion. It's change for the sake of change. And I think that a lot of people who are working within the fashion industry don't go into fashion because they want to, change the world. They go into fashion because they love clothes or they love design or, they want to work with their hands. They want to create. And that's valid. But I think that also underestimates the impact that they're having. So, it's both been a failure. It's been a marketing problem too, because in the late 90s and in the early 2000s, there was an effort by a bunch of designers to do sustainable fashion. But instead of it just being a methodology, it was presented as an aesthetic in itself. So that's where the stereotype of the crunchy hippie, that eco-fashion is a hemp sack, or, that it's uncomfortable and that it's ugly.
That's a great point.
That's where that stereotype came from. And now we know that you can make anything. It can be the most wild, bizarre piece of clothing that you can think of, or it can be the most conservative, proper, preppy thing you can think of. It's about production and it's about the materials. It's not about the aesthetic.
Well, we've got a couple of minutes left, and unfortunately, but I want to ask you, recently on April 4th at Vogue's headquarters, there was a sustainable fashion, and you were just talking about sustainable fashion. There was a sustainable fashion panel. What did you watch it, and what do you think, and where are we now in 2013 with regards to sustainable fashion and the bigger brands?
There was this talk that H&M sat down with a few ethical fashion experts, and they did a live cast from Vogue headquarters, and I think it was a good effort. But what they did was it really ended up being thrown back at the consumer, where they say, the majority of the impact of clothing has to do with care. It has to do with how you wash your clothes and how you dry your clothes. Right. And I think it was a real disappointment because they didn't talk about the advancements in technology and in production and in materials. And H&M, a company like H&M is huge. They're a global brand. Sure. And they have the power to really make a change on a large level, whether it's change for their workers, the people in their factories, which they didn't talk about at all on the program because it's very controversial. Got it. That H&M, doesn't want to admit that people die in factory fires being paid, slave labor wages. Got it. So, but they have a collection that's called the Conscious Collection, which is a really good effort where they're using recycled polyesters and organic cottons and stuff like that. So, so in short, they're making an effort, but there's a lot more to do. They're making an effort. There's a lot more to do. Yes, and animals never enter the equation into these discussions within the mainstream ethical fashion conversation. And it is the single greatest cause of the worst environmental problems. Wow. No matter what industry you're talking about, the animal agricultural industry is the worst, results in the worst environmental problems. Well, all right. Well, Joshua, we covered a lot today, and we're going to have you back. I want our listeners to go and look and enjoy the great products you're creating and enjoy the amazing websites that I've been enjoying prior to the show. Discerning Brute and BraveGentleMan.com talks all about these issues and also has a lot of great products, ethical fashion products that everyone could enjoy. Joshua Katcher, you are a visionary, entrepreneurial, ethical fashion superstar and truly living proof that green is good.